Mr. Speaker.
I call Andrew Little.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. A pleasure to take a call on this very important Taxation, Annual Rates, Employee Allowances and Remedial Matters Bill. And the speech we've just heard from Mr. Goldsmith is the typical old-fashioned national Tory grandee speech that we hear so often, that taxes are somehow evil, somehow dirty and filthy, that somehow businesses who thrive in an environment where they get good infrastructure, good governance, uncorrupt government, somehow that they don't need to pay their way. John Hayes knows all about it because he's another champion of the old Tory cause, run down the state, lower the taxes, tell business the leash is off, but still want to ply them with the goodies every time they get up. Well, that's not the way a decent tax system runs. It's not the way a modern country runs. It's not the way you build a productive economy. And here comes the catch, right? We're all communists. Oh, yeah, well, the last time we heard that was when we had, of course, the Cullen Fund. Was the Cullen Fund stealth by communism or communism by stealth? They cannot get over it. They cannot get over it when you have a government, and usually under the Labor Party, that functions well. A government like the last Labor government that produced surpluses for 9 years, that built up the Cullen Fund, that allowed ACC to build up its investment fund. It was $11 billion. Now today, over $25 billion. These are state organisations backed by the government, backed by the state, and are providing the anchor, the anchor stone to this economy. This government in office now could not do what it has done without the investments made, the surpluses produced, and the investment funds that were developed by the last government. That's the truth about the New Zealand economy today. It is in the shape that it is in. It got through the global financial crisis because of the foundation, firm foundation, laid by the last Labor government, because it had good, coherent tax policy, but more importantly, had an IRD focused on tax collection, tax gathering, which is part of the platform of tax fairness. This government doesn't care about tax fairness. It doesn't mind that large overseas domiciled corporates get away with paying virtually nothing. Happy to take our infrastructure, happy to take our environment, happy to take our educated workforce, but they don't want to pay their way. And this government thinks that that's okay. Well, it's not okay, Mr. Speaker. It's not okay, and we need to make sure that we have a set of tax legislation, some of the most complex and sophisticated this House ever deals with, that has as an underlying principle fairness. Fairness to all taxpayers, fairness to and amongst all citizens as well. And so when we look at this bill, notwithstanding our support for it, we want to know that this bill is part of a growing platform of fairness in tax policy and in taxation. I want to comment on a couple of aspects of it, and one is about the employee provisions, at least insofar as they relate to accommodation being provided for work to be done, and that relates specifically to the growing requirement for the Christchurch rebuild to depend on people who come from outside Christchurch to do their work, many of whom sort of then leave for the weekend and then come back, and that is employer-supplied accommodation. The way this bill deals with that is to allow a tax concession, or at least for it not to be regarded as an employee benefit and therefore subject to fringe benefit tax for a period of 2 years, extendable to 3 years in the right conditions. And I just want to make this point because the debate about employee benefits, or at least benefits that employees get to enable them to do their job, comes up periodically. And the Inland Revenue Department has a funny sort of starting point, which is that any provision to an employee that's related to doing their job, whether in this case it's accommodation, or whether in other cases it's a tool allowance or a meal allowance, the IRD's starting point in this day and age is to say, well, the starting point is that it's a private benefit. Well, it's not a private benefit, and that should not be the starting point. And once upon a time, the starting point for IRD would be, well, you're employed to do this job, you're working in unsociable conditions, which is why you've been called to leave your regular home and your family and the place where you have your roots and your connections, and to go and work in that location, and you're being provided accommodation. There's no sense of private benefit in that at all, because you're getting a roof over your head, a bed to sleep in, and maybe a meal provided. That does not make it private benefit. You're there under the condition that you're an employee and you're fulfilling your obligations to your employer. That is not a private benefit. That's fulfilment of your employment conditions. And I hope that IRD starts getting the lesson that because you get these things provided by your employer, that somehow this is a private benefit. They are not. They are there in fulfilment of your employment obligations. Sure, you might sign up to it. And the nature of the labour market is that increasingly people in a more mobile workforce, people are prepared to travel longer distances, to spend time away from home, many more nights a week away from home than perhaps was the case even 20 years ago. That's the nature of the labour market, the dynamic labour market that I think even Paul Goldsmith referred to. But the quid pro quo for that is that when people are in employment arrangements that require them to be away from their home and away from their family, that the shelter that they get, the roof over their head that they get, the warm bed that they get to sleep in, is not a private benefit. It is to enable them to do that job that the employer benefits from, and that the community in which that work is being done benefits from, and that ultimately the New Zealand community benefits from. So let's stop seeing these things that are provided by employers to entice workers in to do work in different locations as somehow private benefit. That should not be the starting point of the analysis. And so, sir, we welcome the provision in this bill that allows there to be some tax concession for those people in the construction industry to be able to be accommodated, to be given accommodation provision that is not then subject to taxation. That'll be a benefit, if not to the employee, then certainly to the employer, who would otherwise have to have paid that fringe benefit tax. The other point I want to make too, it's about, which really draws upon a point that my learned colleague Dr. David Clark was making, which is about the vast amount of uncollected taxation, particularly amongst independent contractors. And I want to make this point as well, is that this is also reflects the nature of the labour market today, that a growing number of people are designated independent contractors, but the reality is a growing number of those independent contractors are given that status against their will, not as part of their choice, and in some cases they don't know it at all. And I'm dealing with a case of a worker who was employed as a conventional employee. That's what the employment agreement says that he was employed under. But when he was paid, he was paid as an independent contractor. So the employer paid resident withholding tax, but did not pay income tax as provided for under the income tax legislation as pay-as-you-go taxation. So, or pay-as-you-earn taxation. And so he has discovered after many months that he is, and having now received an invoice from Inland Revenue, that he is not the employee that he thought he was. He is an independent contractor. The employer has acted unscrupulously, and I am now corresponding with both that employer and Inland Revenue, and indeed ACC, who is also the recipient of deductions, or has not been in this case because they haven't been deducted, because this chap has been operating under an employment fraud, for which there is only one party responsible, and that is the employer. And I suspect we will find a significant chunk of that IRD debt against independent contractors will be against people who have not even known or do not even know that they are independent contractors and are receiving invoices for taxes that they did not know that they were liable for. And so we need to address that issue as well. But, Mr. Speaker, it is good to see legislation that takes a sensible and pragmatic and practical approach to these tax matters, understanding that a tax system, to be credible and efficient, needs to have integrity, and is the basis upon which credible governments in the first world, such as we are and aspire to be, have good tax systems underpinning them.
I call Gareth Hughes.